Hello and welcome to another Just Roll With It review, where today we're going to be taking a look at Viticulture, the 1 to 6 player competitive game by Stonemaier Games. It's an oldie, but still a goodie. But before we jump into the actual review, let's take a look at how the game plays. Alright, so before we get into the proper review of the game, I think it's important for people to have a general idea of how the game sort of flows and operates. So this is by no means a rule video. This is just a very high-level overview of kind of how the game plays, so you get a general idea of whether or not it's right for you. So what we're looking at here is the main board of the game. Over on the right-hand side, there's this little scroll that shows the exact sequence of play for a round. It's split into spring, summer, fall, winter, and then year end. And you're going to go through those 4 seasons each round of the game. And you're going to keep doing that until somebody gets to 20 victory points. In which case that year ends, and then you determine who the winner is. So just because somebody got to 20 points doesn't mean they are the winner. That just means you will play until the end of that year, and then you'll decide who the winner is based on who has the most victory points. So some things to note here is the board is split sort of evenly in half. So on this half you can see all of the action spaces, which are these little ovals, are blue, and on this half they are yellow. This is because the game, like we said before, is played in the 4 seasons order. So you're going to start with spring, which is where you're going to choose what order you're going to play in. So every character is going to have a little rooster meeple. And at the beginning of the game, it will be randomly determined, but one player is going to have this cluster of grapes. That is the first player token, but the only thing that this really determines is just who gets to pick first on this wake-up chart, and the wake-up chart is the actual determining factor of what order people play in. So, when you have the grape token, you will get to pick first, and if you go up here at the number 1 space, that means you're waking up the earliest and you will get to go first before everybody else. But you'll notice there's no benefit to doing that, other than you get to go first. On the bottom, so if you decide to go last, you're going to get a bonus like an extra worker, which is very valuable, obviously, in a worker placement game where the number of actions you have is determined by how many workers you have. So there's other benefits as well. You can get vine cards, you can get contracts, money, a victory point, or even some visitors, which we'll talk about in a second. So you would choose, and then the person to the left of the person of the cluster would choose, and it would keep going around until everyone has chosen a spot to start on this track. And then you will move on to summer. Now, the summer phase is one of the 2 main phases, summer and winter being the 2 major ones. Spring and fall are pretty small sections, but in summer, you are able to do the actions in yellow. If you have 2 players, you can only do the most opaque left oval as the worker space. Only one worker can go on each space. If you're playing with 3 to 4 players, the 2 leftmost spaces are available. And if you're playing with 5 to 6 players, all 3 circles or ovals are available to place workers on. The actions are various things like drawing these green cards, which are your vines. They are pretty simple. They will sometimes have a requirement up in the top of a certain building be built. We'll talk about a little bit of that later. But they'll also show what grapes that they produce. So this one would give you 1 red grape, and 1 white grape when you use it, or when you harvest it. There's all sorts of different grape cards. This is where you would draw them. You can build structures, which we'll talk about in a second, but they're these little building improvements that you can put onto your player board that give you little benefits. Like we said, certain structures are required, like the trellis or irrigation for certain grapes, in order to be planted in your field. You can play one of your summer visitors. So there's 2 types of visitors. There's summer visitors, which can only be used in the summer. And they do all sorts of different things. They give you more vines, victory points, money, all sorts of things. And then there's winter visitors, which are very similar, but can only be used in the winter. So if you wanted to play one of those, you'd have to go to this space, and it would have to be a summer visitor. You can sell at least 1 grape, or which you've already produced on your board. We'll talk about that more in a second. or you can buy/sell one of your fields. So an easy way to make money in the beginning of the game is to sell one of your larger fields. So you'll have a value 7, 6, and 5 field, and when you sell them, they'll be worth that much money. And you can buy them back later, which is what that action allows you to do. You can buy or sell one field later in the game. Now the field has to be empty. You can't have grapes planted on it, but you can sell that if you need a little bit of a cash infusion right away at the beginning of the game. You can also plant one of your green cards, which is very important because that's how you're going to actually be planting vines onto those green cards onto this field, so that you can actually start producing some grapes and getting the process of winemaking going. So that's how that looks. Then once everyone has either decided that they don't want to place any workers, so as you're going around, worker spaces are going to start to fill up. There will be different colors on here. You may decide that you're running low on workers and you want to do some stuff in the winter, so you pass. And maybe some other workers, some other players keep placing workers and keeps going. But essentially, you determine how many actions you take in summer. So if you're trying to save and do some things in winter, you can just decide to pass and hold your workers for later. So your workers are one pool for the entire year. You don't get to use all of your workers in summer, get them back, and then use all of your workers again in winter. You are restricted to deciding when and how you use them throughout the year, but they can only be used once. So once everybody has passed, everyone's done doing what they want to in summer, it will move to fall, where you get to choose one of those two types of visitors, either a winter visitor or a summer visitor, to then go into your hand, and that's available for you to use later. If you take a summer visitor, you're not going to be able to use it until next summer. If you take a winter visitor, you could use it right away. The action spaces are going to look very similar to summer on the winter side, but they'll do things like allow you to draw a purple card, which is a contract. Now, contracts are your main way of scoring points throughout the game. They're going to have a certain amount and value of wine that's required. So like this one requires 2 red wine of value 4 or higher and 3 or higher. So it doesn't have to be exactly 3 and exactly 4. You could do a 5 and a 3 or a 5 and a 4. As long as it's higher value than what is being requested, it's just fine. They won't complain about it because it's a more expensive wine that they're getting for cheaper. Then you're going to score, if you have that and you turn this in, you're going to score the 3 victory points here that are listed on this one. And then you're also going to get 1 residual income, meaning at the end of every year, you just get a money. That doesn't sound like a lot, but you don't get a ton of money in this game. So a very good way to do that is by fulfilling these contracts. Now, this is where you can draw those contracts. And again, that's the main way of basically getting victory points, is fulfilling these contracts. Here is where you can fill these contracts. You may notice that in the second space on some of these, there is a bonus that you get. Now, if you are the first one to go there in a 3 to 4 player or 5 to 6 player game, you can just get that bonus. You don't have to go left to right, so you don't have to not get the bonus, and the second person gets the bonus. As long as you're playing with more than 2 players, you can go ahead and just get that bonus. So right here, it just gives you an extra victory point. So that allows you to turn into one of those contracts that you got earlier. Discard those wine tokens from your cellar, which we'll talk about in a moment, and score victory points and get some residual income. So now I'm getting, one money at the end of every year. You can also make wine tokens, which we'll talk about in a second. You can harvest one of your fields, which allows you to turn those grapes that you had planted, so these grape cards. It allows you to get these wine tokens, or turn these into grapes, rather. So harvest the grapes off of the vines and put them onto your board. This allows you to take those grape tokens that you've harvested off of the vines and make them into wine, essentially. And again, we'll go over that in more detail. We'll look at the actual player board in a second here. And then you can also train more workers here. So you start out with usually 2 regular workers and a grande worker. And once those are used up, you're done for the round. You only get really the 3 actions, so you can do this action to get yourself, for 4 coins, you can get yourself another worker for the next year. Since I mentioned grande meeples, we may as well talk about those here. So everyone has one meeple that is much bigger than all their other meeples, and that is called your grande meeple. A grande meeple can go to a spot even if it's already occupied. So let's say we had here, we were playing, let's just say we're playing a 2-player game, right? So there's only one action space available at each location. So it means that once, us or our opponent goes here to train a worker, now nobody else can. Well, let's say we really need that worker. You can use your Grande Meeple anywhere to basically violate this restriction of how many people can be placed here. It just automatically can go anywhere. It can also be just used as a regular worker, but it has that added advantage of being able to go somewhere that's already blocked off, that's already been used, and that's no longer available. So once everybody's done doing everything they want to in the winter phase, it goes to the year end, which is going to involve aging your grape and wine tokens, which we'll talk more about in a second, collecting those residual payments from contracts, discarding down to 7 cards, so you can't have more than that, and then rotating this cluster of grapes first player token to the person next counterclockwise, and then that person choosing first where they want to go on the wake-up chart. So that covers the main board of the game. Let's quickly switch over to the player board and talk more about what that looks like. Alright, so when you start out, your board is going to look something like this. So you're going to have a couple of workers available to you right away, and you're going to have a Grande Meeple. Now, these are all your starting resources are determined by Mama and Papa cards. You will get one of each at the beginning of the game. They look like this. And these will essentially list all of your starting resources. So your Mama is going to give you 2 regular workers, $2, a grape card, or a vine card rather, which is the green ones, and a winter visitor. And then your Papa card is going to give you a Grande Meeple, $3 or 3 lira, and then either your irrigation upgrade, which is one of the structures you can build, or $3, which is the value of purchasing that later. So that's what determines all of your starting money and things. The only thing you really get to decide is whether or not you want this irrigation, which again is required for certain vines. We showed that one earlier that required, I think, a trellis. This one here does in fact require us to have irrigation built before we can actually put it onto our fields. So that's what these do. Trellis is the same thing, but certain vines will require both, or one or the other, or neither. So once you have all your starting stuff, you are going to start playing the game. And we already talked about the action board, and so most of what you're going to be doing is taking actions on that board and then doing whatever they say. To kind of elaborate on that a little bit, or what it looks like here on our player board, you have all of the different structures you can build, and those are represented by little tokens. There's the trellis and irrigation. We've got large cellar. Let's see, where's the other cellar? There's the large cellar. So medium cellar. We've got our cottage. We've got a windmill. We've got a yoke. All sorts of fun things that you can build by taking that structure action on the main board that we talked about earlier, the build one structure. These all give you different benefits. Again, the irrigation and trellis are the ones that may be required for certain grape types to be grown. The cottage lets you draw basically an extra summer or winter visitor each fall. Where you'd normally just draw 1, you can now draw 2. Your cellars are going to allow you to store higher value wines. You'll see the numbers go up from 1 to 9 for white wine, 1 to 9 for red wine, and then you'll see that the blush and sparkling wines only appear in the medium, and then blush, or rather sparkling, only shows up in the large cellar. So you'd have to purchase those upgrades in order to be able to store those types of wine, which we'll elaborate more on in a second. So we also have our crush pads over here. So you may have heard me mention that you could sell grapes. This is where you could sell grapes out of. So once you've harvested your grapes, so you'd have to take the harvest action in winter to essentially harvest 1 or more of your fields. And when you harvest it, you get all of the tokens that we talked about. So for instance, if we had something like this, so let's pretend our trellis is built. So this one has a maximum value of 5. So perfect. Let's say we had earlier planted these 2 vines. We could go ahead and get a level 4 grape because we get a combined value of 4 red and a level 1 white when we harvested this field. Now each field can only be harvested once every year. Shouldn't be too much of an issue because there's really the only one action space where you can harvest one field, or if you're playing with more than 2 players, you can take the middle action space if you get there right away and harvest 2 fields. But that's how that's going to look. So when you harvest those fields, you're going to get grape tokens. So these little translucent, sort of glass-looking semicircles have the, or domes, show the value of the grape. Now, you could sell the grapes right out of here. If you're really hard on cash, you can see how much they're worth. So if they're on this bottom set of pads from, value 7 to 9, you can get 3 money. If they're in the middle, you can get 2, you can get 1. That's not really worth it. What we want to do is make up to 2 tokens, wine tokens, which is another action on the winter side of the board that allows you to take these tokens and move them from whatever value they are in here into here on that number. Now, again, we would need to have the medium seller unlocked in order to place anything here, but let's just pretend we do. Let's pretend we have our medium and our large seller, so we have all of these available to us instead of just the starting one. We can now have these wine tokens, and at the end of every year, you may have heard me mention earlier that these will age up 1, so they will basically increase in value. They'll also age up in your crush pads if they haven't been turned into wine yet, but every year they age, becoming more valuable. And we talked about on our contract earlier, something like this, where you need a value 4 red wine and a value 3 red wine or higher in order to fulfill that contract. So you could start something at a level 1, and after 4 years, in the game, not in real life, this would now be aged enough that you could use it to fulfill this contract. We also have a couple of different combinations of special wines. We had blush, which I mentioned earlier, and we have sparkling. Now, these are very high value wines. They're very difficult to create. You need to have a medium cellar to even create blush wine, and you need a large and a medium cellar to create these sparkling wine combinations. So these are incredibly high value. Contracts that require these are going to be worth a lot of victory points, a lot of residual income. Those are going to be your very high value contracts that take a while, because it's going to take you a while to age these things up. So the way that would work is if you had grapes on your crush pads, and this is why the fact that they age on your crush pads is very important. When you go to make your 2 wine tokens, right, the action space in winter tells us that we can make up to 2 wine tokens, not that we can turn 2 grape tokens into wine. It's saying that we can combine these and make wine with them. So in this case, we can see down here that sparkling wine requires a white wine grape and then 2 red grapes. So we have that. So let's say we actually were something like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, perfect, so 8. So we have a value 3, a value 2 on the red side for grapes, and then we have a value 3 on the white side. We could combine these 3, which would be a total value of 8, right? 3, 3, 2, so that's 8 points, into a singular token, right? Because we're trying to make sparkling wine, which requires 1 white, 2 reds. We could turn those into an 8 value sparkling wine. Now that would be very difficult to do. We would likely have to age these grapes up, leave them for a couple rounds so that they get nice and aged in our crush pads, and then combine them into that nice, expensive sparkling wine there. Blush is similar. It's just a white and a red instead of a white and 2 reds. But yeah, that's the gist of what it looks like on your player board. So you're going to be planting these vines using those green vine cards. You're going to be harvesting them on your board to create little grape tokens. You're going to be then turning those grape tokens into wine that will be in your cellar. These will both age at the end of every year, and then you're going to be trying to fulfill contracts. So it's a relatively simple game. That's kind of how the flow works. Hopefully that helped you better understand how this game operates. Without further ado, back to the review. Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this game, not only is it pretty thematic as a worker placement goes. Generally, worker placements, Euros, tend to be pretty themeless. Yeah. This one integrates the theme really well. A lot of the things make sense, like the different phases of the year. Yeah. When you're planting things in the summer, you're harvesting in the winter, stuff like that. the way that you have like your grape cellar, which you can upgrade later. I realize that this should be off of there. But you start with like a very basic cellar that can only hold some very new wine, and then you can upgrade, get basically like a larger cellar that can store more expensive and more aged wine. You have the crush pads, so you actually have to put the grapes in the crush pads, which is an extra step, but it also allows you to basically combine things in order to make other things. So you can make better wine by combining those when you take them off of your crush pad, and you can also make rosé.
You can make the basic wines. So you have red wine and white wine. You can make those basically, and then it says blush. You can make by blush, and then a sparkling wine you can make in combination of those two, red and whites, and those are just more.
And those are worth a lot of points because you need a lot of for sparkling, you need 2 reds and a white, and even create it, and you also have to have the largest cellar to even be able to store it. But those are also worth a lot of victory points. So there's strategy there. You could go for just red and whites, but you're not going to be scoring as much points. But you can also go for the more expensive wines, and you'll be which are harder to produce, but they can get you generally more money and victory points.
Yeah. I also like the strategy of like you get up here at the top, you can see you have 3 different fields, and they can each hold so many wine. And so I like that strategy too, is like being able to optimize how you trigger your field at the different times too. Like I need, is like you don't want to like have all because you can only do 1 or 2 in a round unless you get special effects. So you to get additional harvesting triggers. So if you harvest this only has white on it. Well, now you're stuck with no red wine. So being able to like mix and match and be able to play these out, so you can get the best optimization too. I just like the engine that you can build, and this like the optimization.
It's super simple. Like I think this is one thing that Stonemaier games do very well, because we talked about this in other videos with Scythe.
Yeah.
That it's just really well designed. Yeah. Like the visual aspect of it is designed in such a way that it makes sense. Yeah. There's not like a lot of rule referencing that you have to do. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about the 3 Cs, but like everything is pretty self-explanatory. There's not really a lot of fiddly rules. The way that things, like on the board, when you have these like improvements, it just says what they do.
Right there, yeah.
Like it's just listed right there. The contracts and things, like super clear, like you need whatever's in the top, and if you have that and you go to the space, then you get the victory points and the money. And then, same thing with like the fields. You're maximized to a certain amount of grapes, and it even says right on the card.
Right.
Like this one can only, I think it's 5, 6, 7, right? That you can have a total of.
Yeah.
For value of your vines, so you can't start with like amazing grapes.
Yeah.
Especially when you're starting out, you have to kind of go for some kind of lower end grapes. They're like 2s and 3s, so you can fit them on your field. And then so they start out lower, but you can age them up. So like when you sell is very important, things like that.
And even along with simplicity, like you got these summer visitors and winter visitors, the text on them super simple. Like there's like
the symbology and everything that's used is like very straightforward. I don't think I've ever had to try to like look up what one of these means. You know what I mean? Like some games, there's so much symbolism, there's so much, unique edge case stuff that you have to like look up when there's these special ability cards. But like these make perfect sense.
Right, yeah. My girlfriend, this is one of her favorite games. She's always like, "Can we play the wine game?" And she's never played games, and she's just like, this is one where she can get in and just like I taught it to her quick, and she can go through, and it's like it makes sense for someone new to games, while still being definitely not an entry level game. Someone who, if you're not an idiot, you can figure this game out pretty quickly.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's a testament to the design. Yeah. It's like it's more of a medium weight game. Yeah. It's definitely not like a Ticket to Ride, Pandemic, like very light introductory game. It's definitely a heavier game.
Right, but it's laid out so simply.
Right, but if you have someone who can teach it, the board. Again, like even the action spaces. Play a blue card. Like it's not a lot of text, but could you misunderstand that?
Right.
It's a blue card.
Right.
Play the blue card. So that's how you play your visitors, your winter visitors. Get money. Even like how the grande meeples work. So
the big guys.
The other interesting thing about this game is like it's a worker placement. It really doesn't do anything that other worker placements do other than having like aging of grape tokens.
Yeah, that's it.
Otherwise, everything like the spaces and everything, they're limited to depending on the number of players you play. There's only so many spots available. Yeah. and only one worker per spot, but your Grande Meeple can basically go anywhere.
Yeah.
So you have one that you have that can basically go anywhere, so there's not a lot of you're still fighting for spaces, because I know some worker placements either go too far one direction or too far the other, where you're either super limited on spaces and no one can ever go in a space anyone else goes in, or you have the opposite problem where it's you can basically go anywhere no matter what. And we've played games of both, but I like how this does it, where you have one worker that can go anywhere, so you kind of save that one, and if somebody takes the spot you were going for, you can use that guy, and you really need that one for your turn, you can go there and sort of trump.
But that also is
the spot.
A fun strategy too. Is I need these 2 spots. When do I use this guy? And and even the strategy of just that is there's enough there. Well, when do I use that? When do I There's enough. It's very you said, talked about, not super heavy, but there's enough just little things to think about that are just this just makes it interesting little decision that you can have in playing this game.
Yeah, the other thing I'll mention that I really like is the wake up track, which is basically how you bid for
Turn order.
Who goes first in the turn order. Because basically the better rewards are lower on the turn order. So there's kind of a fun decision making process there where you can choose to go later to get a better reward that you need. Because going first, you don't get any bonus.
But you get to go first.
But you get to go first. So if there's an action space you really want to go to and you don't want to use your Grande Meeple to go there, you can go there first. Which I really like. I like the wake up track. That's another sort of fun. It makes the turn order thing fun and interesting as opposed to just being passing a token around, so.
Because there is even that little first player token, but that's just who gets the pick first on that track, and then it goes from there. So.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And then there's that nice catch up. I like that having the 7th one on the track there is an extra worker for
Yes. Yep.
So that's super nice to be well, I'm really far behind, or someone else has more, because you only get so many workers unlocked at the start of the game. So I'm down in action. I need to catch up. You get to use that.
Yeah, you can just, especially if people are all really high in the turn order and there's no point in taking any other bonuses. You can just go last, and take that additional worker, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah. I've done that even when I've had first choice. I'm I need an extra action more than anything else.
Well, that's the thing, is going first is not always the best thing, right? Which is a testament to an interesting game, because there's an interesting decision to be made there, as opposed to just first is always best.
When do I go? And then some of the you get a lot of bonuses for cards. I have no of these cards. I don't want to waste an action on going to the action spot to get that card, so I'll just take one.
Yeah, the swingiest part of the game is definitely the visitors. But yeah, you can do some interesting things with just the visitor cards. A lot of them, if you have a certain amount of things, then you can get a bonus, more money, things like that. They allow you to kind of play around with your strategy too, based on what workers you get.
They are definitely. Because without the visitors, it'd be a lot. Yeah, they just have a lot more.
The visitors definitely add a lot of flavor to the game. Yeah, in terms of abilities and things. But yeah, trying to think what else.
You mentioned that you can sell the grapes.
Oh, that's a good one. You want to talk about that?
I think another thing that's really useful is the fact that you don't even have to make wine out of the grapes if you have them. You can even sell the grapes while they're still in the crush pad, so you can kind of have somewhat of a strategy with that too. If you need money quick, you can sell some grapes.
Yeah, because the money economy is very tight.
Yeah,
a lot of the spaces you can see on the board are 1, 2 coins, 1 coin. You're not getting a ton of coins in this game of a lira. But the other cool thing, aside from what Sam mentioned, is you can actually sell your fields. So you start with 3 fields, and they can hold 5, 6, and 7 total value of grapes on them. And you can also sell them for 5, 6, or 7 coins. So early on in the game, and then you can buy them back later, but early on in the game, you could sell your most expensive field for 7 money, and that's a huge cash influx. And it's basically like a loan, because then later you can pay back the 7 and flip the field back over, and now it's your field. It's you're leasing out the field, basically. Which is, again, pretty thematic, right? And it's a good way to get money. It's a good way to, I like games like that where you can take a loan to your future self while your engine's not working. You don't have a lot of money coming in.
Yeah.
You can sell that off, and then later you can, once you have a bunch of money, you can just buy it back.
Right.
Which I think is a cool, again, very, very thematic for a worker placement. All right. Well, anything else, or should we move on to final thoughts?
Yeah, let's jump into the final thoughts then. So what is this, like 29 on? I think last time I checked, this is 29 on.
It's pretty high.
It's very high on Board Game Geek, but it's like probably it's probably in my top 10. It's close if it's not. I guess I haven't thought about it in a while, but my top 10. But it's just like it works so well. It's like super smooth. Like the gameplay is. That sounded really weird when I said it aloud. But it is super.
I mean, it's
accurate.
Yeah.
It just flows super nice. I like we totally forgot about the variety of setup. Like you have the mom and papa cards, which are right up in the front here.
Which is cool, yeah.
It's just like everyone gets a little bit of a different. Like you get more money,
slightly different starting resources.
Yes, but very slightly. So it's a bit, but it can just dictate kind of a strategy you want to go to. But yeah, it's super smooth. It works super nice. It's pretty fast. The box lies a little bit on the time, but just a little bit. Like, it doesn't exaggerate it, but
it's not too bad. It's like hour and a half, 2 hours, and it says I think 90 minutes is the long side. But yeah, I think that
so it's not terribly
players you have. So.
Yeah, it's true too. So it's not super long, and it just like it works super well. There's enough player interaction to make so it's not just like multiplayer solo, but you also like have your own engine, so it's nice to be able to look at that too, and not have a whole bunch of conflict with other players. And it's also very satisfying to play. Especially if you're drinking wine while you play it, it's just you have to. If I have wine available, I will always drink wine when I play this. Yeah, so just obligated. But it's just super nice to just watch your engine grow as you start to get your fields going, and then you get your wine starting to produce, and then finally being able to make these contracts. Just watch that growth. It's very satisfying.
Yeah, I think we'll just kind of each go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, everything you said. I think the other thing I always go back to, like I said, like with Stonemaier games, is just the way it's laid out. I mean, even on here, they're not afraid to print rule things on the board,
right? As
opposed to some games which are all weird about you can't ruin the aesthetic of it. You gotta keep all that in the rule book. Everything's very straightforward. And then even like I was saying, there's certain action spaces available for the number of players, and I couldn't remember what it was. And then I just realized it's just on the side of the board.
Right.
For 2 players, the first action space is available. 3 to 4 players, the second one, and the first one. And 5 and 6, all 3.
Yeah.
Super nice stuff like that. Never have to look at the rule book.
Right.
It's great. Again, this one shocks me with how much I like it, just because it is just a worker placement.
Right.
There really isn't. I mean, I don't want to undersell it. There are other things going on, but for the most part, it's a pretty pure worker placement. You talk about pure deck builders and things. This is a pure worker placement game. There's not really a lot of other mechanics.
Yeah, the only other thing really you could say, it's mainly worker placement with a bit of engine building of your wine company or whatever. But but still it's 100% worker placement, because that's everything revolves around the worker placement.
Yeah, and it doesn't try to hide that back and lie about it. So yeah, no, very good. I've definitely I've taught this to people who aren't super advanced gamers, people who have only played lighter games, and it's a good bridge between the two. I think. But it's still interesting for people who like heavier games too.
Right.
It's not there's just nothing for you to do, because sometimes there's games like that too where if you like heavier, it's somewhere in the middle, and I like that.
It's good for basically everybody, unless they're absolute never played a board game before. Most everyone who's played anyone that you want to play with will be able to get this game.
Yeah, I think of course all of that, but then also being able to try to fit different types of grapes in the different fields and fit all that in there is a good way of trying to.
Yeah, that
maximize your
optimization is definitely super fun in this game too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once you get that all working, I guess briefly we can touch on expansion. So this is the essential edition of the game, which is basically all you can get now.
Yeah.
There was another version that had some different stuff, less stuff, different stuff. That's no longer a thing. So basically, you can only get the essential edition. Even just as a base game, this is very good.
Yeah.
I actually don't think you necessarily need expansions. I know some people really like the Tuscany stuff. I have personally not played it, but I've looked at the rules and stuff. And while good, I think it's good. I honestly don't think it's necessary.
Right.
I think you could get tired of this first and then introduce that. I don't think it's one of those games where the game's okay, but you need an expansion for it to be a good game. Right. I think there's enough here and enough variety just in the base game, which I think is also a reason that I really like it.
Yeah.
I appreciate when games have enough variety in their base game that you could play it quite a bit before you ever get tired of it.
Right. Yeah.
And then the only other thing, so you have Tuscany, which adds some different stuff. You add structures you can build, which is kind of cool. There's There's a new board that has like some sort of like area control stuff on it. But the other thing that I'll say is there are 2 just card expansions that add more visitors, basically. So one of them is literally called More Visitors. It's Moor, like Moors.
Oh.
Yeah, very clever. And I believe that is the one, I may get this wrong, I believe that is the one that just adds more to the existing decks.
Yeah.
So they're just more cards that you can shuffle in and you basically play in every game. So I have those in, I have not played with them yet. No reason that you couldn't just buy that, especially if it's getting stale and you only want to spend like $20.
Right. It's new visitors.
You can just get some new visitors, shuffle those into the existing decks. No real new rules or anything at all, and you just play. And then the other one is Visitors of the Rhine Valley, which is actually, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, 2 new decks that you can use instead.
Okay.
And they're just different visitors, but I like that. I like when games have like smaller expansions that you can just sort of plug in, and there's no additional rules. It's just more variety.
Yeah.
More of what you already enjoy.
Right.
If you're buying it, you already enjoy the game, and so it's just more of what you enjoy without having to be like, here's 10 new sideboards that you have to learn how to play and manage, and it adds 15 minutes to the setup and teach. No, it's just super simple. You just shuffle them in, or you just use the other decks. Done. Which I like. But again, I think there's like a ton of content in this game, and you can get it for pretty cheap. And it's a small box too. Like it's not massive. Like it's a pretty travelable game.
Right.
In terms of like, we have lots of worker placements that take up way more space than this. So it's pretty efficient in terms of its size. But
yeah, it's one like you were saying. I was gonna say. Like, I don't feel the need to ever get the expansion. One, because you have it, so like I'm probably not going to play without you. But like, yeah, there's so much in it that I'm going to play it. I played it a bunch. Like out of all like my moderate to heavier games that I own, like I played this probably the most, just because it's just
it's so easy to remember.
It's so easy to remember. And get to the table.
It plays so easily, and even without adding, because like I said, I have the little expansions for adding things. They're still pretty big. Yeah, the chances that you're going to go through all of those cards in a game are very low.
Oh yeah, and then even if you like. Yeah, that you use them all or like remember them. Yeah,
and they dictate your strategy enough. What you get, which is again the most like random element of the game, changes your strategy enough that even if you did go through the whole deck, like if you played with 6 people or whatever, you could still play it again and have a completely different strategy because the visitors cards do really dictate like what you kind of go for.
Yeah. And not like in a bad way where it's like you're
no, you don't feel boxed in, but I mean like you can take those as an advantage.
It's just like it's just like instead of get 2 money, get 3. So you're like I'm gonna try to do that instead. I can have the thing.
Yeah. Little bonuses and things. Yeah. They're not like game breaking or anything like that. But cool. So I think we're good. So should we do? Let's do the 3 Cs. Yeah. So I'll explain those quick. Yeah. There will be a longer explanation in the description of what the 3 Cs do, like a paragraph on each one, and then there will also be a link in the description for any of our reviews that goes to a video that explains in even more detail and gives examples of high and low for each of the 3C categories. So 3 Cs are our sort of like objective. The idea is for it to be objective. I mean, everyone has biases, but the idea is for it to be sort of an objective metric. Not a review system, in order to determine if a game is right for you or wrong for you. So the 3 C's stands for complexity, consideration, and comprehension. Complexity is going to be the overall like sort of the weight of the game, how many different mechanics there are in the game, things like that. Comprehension is going to be more focused on how easy the game is to teach, how easy the game is to pick up and understand and remember from time to time. Like if you don't play the game for an extended period of time, can you just get it off the shelf and play it without having to read the rule book? Now, it's rare. Usually if a game is high in complexity, it will be high in comprehension as well, but there are some games that can be high on one and low on the other. And then lastly, consideration, which is mostly going to be focused on turn to turn, how much... you could talk about it as like a strategy thing, like how many different options do you have available, how many things are there to think about and manage when you're taking your turn and to like maximize your stuff. So that's the 3 C's. We will give them 1 to 5 in each category, and then we'll also give our own personal scores afterwards. So cool. So let's start with complexity.
I'd say this is between a 2 and a 3.
I'd say like 2.5.
Yeah,
honestly, like I would say if you were talking about like I know there's a huge debate over like what's heavy and what's light, and the BGG stuff is completely wrong.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever looked at the weights; it's so stupid.
I don't even bother with BGG.
I think this is one that you could use as a perfect example of like exactly in the middle.
Yeah.
It's accessible,
Yeah.
but it's also got enough strategy and replayability
Yeah.
and like decisions that you have to make that you're not like boxed into one thing.
Right.
I would say it's like right in the middle.
Yeah.
He's like
I was
2.5.
thinking about-
Yeah, it's right in the middle.
You said 2 or 3.
I
I
said
was
2 or
already going to
3.
say 2.5. So I was like,
So
just
that's like
split the
2
difference.
right.
So,
Yeah.
Cool. Comprehension.
Yeah, comprehension. So again, with like an overall strategy, Sam, you've been kind of quiet.
Yeah.
We'll cut this out.
No, we'll leave it in.
It's this dead silence. I don't know. Comprehension, I would say is, it's about maybe a 3 on comprehension, just because there's enough like planning your engine out from the beginning. Because if you could, I mean, not that there's a whole bunch of, if you screw up early on, you're not going to like screw yourself later on. But there's enough to like optimize your strategy. So you want to be able to consider like what you do, how you build your vines and your fields, and affects how your grapes go. Which affects how. So you're just like. There's definitely, you have to be focused on your long-term strategy a little bit. So it's
but I don't know. I think 3 is a little high. I'd almost go with like 2.5 again because
I just want to be lame and do 2.5 again.
Well, the only reason I'm saying is we talked about and we
Yeah.
use these the Stonemaier games a lot as an example of games that kind of teach you just by the way that they're designed.
Right. Yes, that's very
and as
true.
being like one of those prime examples.
This is a very
like
teachable game. Yes.
Right. You can tell people like read the spaces. That's what they do. You have the whole round sequence right here. You can't forget what phases and whatever the phases are right here. The different player count, all of that stuff is laid out really well.
Yes, everything is laid out.
So I don't think it's going to go over, half for a comprehension. I think it's a relatively easy teach.
Yeah.
Even for someone who hasn't played a lot of games, I think you can just sort of be like, it's okay, play your first few turns. Because like you said, I don't think, it's not like one of those games where you can just completely screw yourself turn 1.
Right.
Because there are games like that. Scythe actually is kind of one of those. But there are games, like, I haven't played it, but like, people say like Food Chain Magnate is like that. Where if you make, in like your first 2 turns, if you make not an optimal choice,
you're done.
You're going to lose by like 100 points.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even fair. And I don't feel like this is. I think you can really come back. Yeah. And you can bounce back as you learn it. So I don't know. I would say like 2.5. Yeah. So
I just want to be lame again.
We have to decide on that.
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking like a 3 actually as well.
Okay. Well, I mean, if that's the majority, that's fine.
That's kind of my the only again teachable, super easy, pick up and learn. The only thing is just like the engine optimization takes some like. To really optimize your engine, it does take some.
Sure.
That's what bumped it up for me a little bit more.
Sure.
Everything else is super easy, and it's like not even like engine optimization. Like you're not going to kill yourself, but to have the optimal strategy takes some level of this like.
Well, that might be more consideration though. I'm a little worried you're bridging more to consideration because like I don't think I'd ever have to read the rules for this again.
Right.
So I think it should be lower, but
I was going to say considerations. Then if we're moving into that.
Well, we need to settle on the.
Well, we both said 3, so we're going with 3.
3 it is. 3 it is.
Because then, so my consideration is low, is very low.
Really?
Yes, because everything is broken down so nice and neatly. Like, okay, what do you think? You have an option.
Weird stance.
Where are you going to place that? You have a couple like options on your wake up chart. You have like 3 or 4 options on. And you only have a couple of workers. What are you going to do in your summer actions? Pick one of the 2 cards for fall. Winter, everything is very like broken.
But there's a
down.
lot of choices, sure. But there's a lot of choices inside of that. The sequence in which you play your workers, the actions you do with your workers.
And see that to me more is, I guess we're gonna have this argument over and over. But that's more like it doesn't matter. It's fine. I'll shut up.
I would say this is higher consideration.
See that
I think it's lower comprehension because the game is easier to learn and teach. But I think it's more difficult to master.
See, I think comprehension is mastering to me, though.
No.
Okay, no.
That's not how the description of... If you read the description that we wrote and decided that was good.
Okay.
Consideration is like this more of like what you're actually doing. Comprehension is like teaching, rule books...
And so understanding the game.
Yeah.
So understanding how to have an optimal strategy.
Sure.
And that's how I think of it.
I don't know.
Comprehension is long-term, consideration is short-term.
Sure.
That's how I...
Anyway, what is your consideration?
It's 2.
Sure, I agree.
I was thinking it would be higher too, because
Yeah.
like you have to like with consideration. I
there's
feel like you have to put in the fact that you have to like figure out what people you want to put in summer and winter and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So, like,
no,
you have,
I'm going 3.
and you have
Or
like
2.5
the
cents.
I
I think you're mixing
The
up
big ones.
comprehension and consideration.
yeah.
That's why there's a video of which has been filmed already at this point.
Right, it definitely has been filmed already.
I was thinking
okay,
like
so
3.5,
yeah.
I think, with
3.5?
consideration, Yeah.
I say 3. Let's like kind of split the difference.
I'm okay with 3.
Consideration.
Yeah, I'll be okay with 3 on consideration. There is enough going on where like into that I'll be okay.
Yeah, I
with
think
3.
Sam's point is really important. Yes, it's split up, but deciding that's a pretty big decision point. What
Yeah.
workers you use in summer,
Yeah,
what
that
workers
is-
you
yes.
use in winter. That's like a pretty. I mean, there's other things too,
Yeah.
but like and like when you sell your grapes, there's a lot of things to consider. I think it's
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, I'll go with 3 on that then.
cool.
So 2.5, 2.5, 3.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. That's what will be at the end of the video.
Yes.
Cool. So then, you know what? Let's mix things up. Let's start with Sam. Out of 10, personal score. This is what you personally feel about the game, and you can expound on that if you want, but you don't have to.
I think of a reason before I start talking.
You want to come back to you?
No, I can.
Okay.
I have a general number that I was thinking of, but I need to come up with a reason for it.
Fair enough. Perfect 10. 11 out of 10.
11 out of 10. Kill yourself out of 10. Anyways, I would give it a 9 out of 10. I have no real complaints with the game at all. It's just a super fun game. I'll play it basically whenever.
Yeah.
I've already talked about everything I like about it. I have not a whole lot to add. Just that I really like the game. And I'll just play it.
Yeah, I don't know that any of us really have anything to add. I think I'd go with a 9 as well. I struggle with giving things anything close to a 10.
Yeah,
But
that's I have no like major reasons.
Yeah, I don't-
besides to take off the point. Besides, it's just not like
I feel like
it's, a 10 is be like this is the best game in the world. This is amazing. Like
yeah. Well, it's yeah. I also feel bad because like it's like we haven't said anything bad about it, but
Yeah.
I don't know that there really like I'm trying to think of anything that would really be bad. I don't really think that there is. It's just if it doesn't work for you.
Yeah,
you know, like
yeah.
I mean, like objectively, I don't think there's anything like broken or anything about the game. I think I'd give it a 9 as well.
Yeah, the biggest thing we said against it is like it doesn't do anything revolutionary.
But somehow
That's
it works.
yeah.
I don't get
somehow
that either.
That's the biggest
like, somehow
complaint. That's the
it-
biggest thing we said against it, and that's like not even a big.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything particularly revolutionary for worker placements,
Right.
but I like it better.
Yeah.
And spoiler alerts for like I've been working on my top 100. This is in the top 10.
Yeah.
So like I have to basically give it a 9. I think I'd be lying if I didn't. So
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking actually more of a 7.5 to 8. I don't think it's necessarily my favorite worker placement ever.
okay.
I definitely like it, and I don't think there's necessarily a ton of things, like anything specifically wrong with it, but I don't think it's necessarily my personal favorite.
Sure. That's
Do
fine.
you know what your favorite worker placement is?
You're allowed to have different
Specifically.
opinions.
Huh? That's fine. I mean, I didn't know if you did or not.
Yeah, I was just curious too. So yeah.
Because as soon as you ask me what my favorite worker placement game is, if I don't, I just be like, I don't know, brain's done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anytime anyone asks me my favorite, I'm like, well, there's like 8. There's like
Or like,
Cool. Well, yeah, I think we can wrap it up. Thanks so much for watching. Please let us know in the comments if you like this game, if you hate it, your thoughts on it, and as well as things that we could review next. Yeah, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.